After I was reborn, I avoided every possible interaction with Chloe. When she transferred to a job in the South, I applied to a university in the Pacific Northwest. When she bought a house down south, I made a point of settling up north. I did this because in my past life, her first love remained single his entire life for her. Feeling she owed him, she secretly adopted a child with him. Even our own child was so moved by their profound love story that she joined their little family. After retrieving our marriage application, I finally let out a breath of relief. No one knew I had been reborn. I rushed over at the last possible moment before the marriage application was officially filed. Citing an error in the family information section, I asked for the form back. The clerk at the registrar's office was puzzled. You two file the application in the morning, and now one of you is back to withdraw it in the afternoon. Are you having second thoughts about getting married? Not wanting to complicate things, I just shook my head. The information was incorrect. I'll fix it and bring it back. The clerk seemed relieved and told me to bring it back as soon as it was corrected. I nodded. The moment I stepped outside, I threw the marriage application straight into the trash. In this life, there was no way Chloe and I were ever getting married. In my past life, even after we filed the paperwork, Chloe's attitude toward me grew increasingly cold. I just assumed that was her personality and didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was on my deathbed that I learned she'd had a man, her first love, Leo, by her side all along. He never married all for her. Finally, when Chloe turned 40, she was so moved by his devotion that she adopted a boy with him. Later, even my own daughter was touched by their pure love and started seeing them secretly behind my back. If my daughter hadn't let it slip while I was dying, saying, "Now Mom and Uncle Leo can finally be together properly," I would have remained in the dark forever. It was only then that I realized my entire life had been a joke. Chloe's coldness, her frequent job transfers, it all had a reason. The reason was Leo. Every time she relocated, it was to the opposite end of the country from me. We were married for 60 years, but the time we actually spent together probably amounted to less than one. In contrast, wherever she went, Leo followed. He even became her personal physician later on. Feeling indebted to him for his unwavering devotion and quiet companionship, she consented to adopting a child with him and allowed that child to call her mom. Even my own daughter was hoping I would die soon just to unite the star-crossed lovers. Back at the apartment, I looked around. The old place with a complicated expression. In my previous life, Chloe and I were married here just 1 month from today. After the wedding, she was transferred to a post in Georgia. I wanted to go with her, but she said the conditions were too harsh and convinced me to stay behind. I ended up living here for the next 30 years. What I didn't know was that less than 6 months after her transfer, Leo followed her down there. From that point on, they were inseparable, beginning a lifetime of entanglement. The irony was I was worried about her being all alone with no one to look after her, constantly offering to join her, but she refused every single time. And so it went. Had her male confidant for company wherever she was, while I, for her sake, never left this town. When I got back to the apartment, Chloe wasn't home yet. I went straight to my room, opened the bottom drawer of my desk, and found my university acceptance letter. In my past life, between Chloe's transfer and my mother-in-law fainting unexpectedly a month later, the family needed someone to stay and help. So, I gave up my chance to attend university in the Pacific Northwest. It was the biggest regret of my life. I traced my fingers over the acceptance letter looking at my name and the university's embossed crimson seal, and I almost started to cry. I remember back then in my past life when I was on my deathbed, Leo would visit me with my daughter. Knowing I didn't have long, he came every day. But whenever we were alone, he would drop the act and his words would twist like a knife in my gut. "So what if you had the title of husband?" He'd say. "I was the one by Chloe's side her entire life. You were nothing but a free caretaker for her parents and our child. In fact, I should thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter for me." He would drone on, and the most tragic part was that I didn't even have the strength to curse him out. I just had to lie there and watch my own daughter treat him like her real father. And when I finally drew my last breath, I saw my daughter let out a sigh of relief and heard her say, "Uncle Leo's long wait is finally over." I carefully put the acceptance letter away. The past was the past. As I was making dinner, Chloe finally came home looking completely exhausted. I saw that her clothes were soaking wet, and it suddenly brought me back to this exact day in my previous life. Back then, knowing she had filed our marriage application, I had bought a lot of groceries to make a celebratory dinner. She came home very late that night, also drenched from head to toe. I was so worried and kept asking what had happened, but Chloe was distant and wouldn't say a word. I only found out later that Leo had somehow fallen into the river and Chloe had been the one to save him. I scoffed, putting two and two together with my past life. It was obvious. Leo must have found out she submitted the application and in his despair staged a suicide attempt to manipulate her. That would explain why she was so cold to me that day in our past life. She probably blamed me for Leo's little drama. But how was I the guilty one? She was the one who said she wanted to get married. She was the one who filed the paperwork. She was the one who promised she would treat me well for the rest of our lives. Yet, in the end, I was painted as the villain tearing true love apart. So, this time when I saw Chloe walking drenched, I simply glanced away. I didn't rush around boiling water for her bath like I did before. I just calmly continued cooking. With no hot water ready, Chloe had no choice but to quietly change out of her wet clothes herself. She started sneezing during dinner, but I pretended not to hear. After we ate, I was in the kitchen washing dishes when I saw her pacing restlessly in the living room. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore, grabbed her coat, muttered, "I'm stepping out for a bit," and rushed out the door. I pressed my lips together. On a yellowed poster on the wall, I solemnly drew a single vertical tally mark. Once I made 10 of these marks, I could leave this place for good. Chloe didn't come back until just before dawn. I heard her trying to walk quietly from the other room, but pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I assumed she had already left for work and was about to head out to buy my train ticket when I heard coughing from her room. I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth, then continued eating as if I'd heard nothing. Train tickets were hard to get this time of year. The lines alone would take hours, but this ticket was too important. I needed to buy it as soon as possible to have peace of mind. Just as I was about to leave, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and was surprised to see a younger-looking Leo standing there, his face pale. He shot me a quick sideways glance before lowering his head and mumbling nervously, "Ethan, I'm here to see Chloe." With that posture, anyone would assume something improper was going on between him and Chloe. But I didn't have time to play along with his act. I left the door open and walked right past him down the stairs. I grabbed my money, got on my bike, and headed out. Relying on memory and asking for directions a few times, I finally made it to the train station just before 10 o'clock. It was the holiday season, so the station was packed with people and the ticket lines were long. I picked the shortest line I could find and started waiting. I waited until nearly noon, right before the ticket agents went on their lunch break for my turn. By the time I got to the window, all the seated tickets for my destination were gone. Without a second thought, I bought a standing room only ticket for the earliest departure. After carefully tucking the ticket into an inside pocket, I biked back home. I had been bracing myself to walk in on a tearful scene between the two tragic lovers. Instead, when I opened the door, I found Chloe sitting alone in the living room. Her bedroom door was wide open, almost as if it had been left that way on purpose. When she saw me, she opened her mouth to speak, but I just turned and walked into the kitchen. I was a little hungry anyway. Time to make lunch. During lunch, I could feel Chloe wanting to explain something, but since I remained silent, she held back. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and looked up at me. Ethan, about earlier. I kept my eyes on my plate and said flatly, "Don't talk while you're eating." Chloe froze, swallowing the words she was about to say. I laughed. Inwardly. In the past, I was always the one trying to make conversation. Whenever I brought something up, she would either give a non-committal response or tell me, "Don't talk while you're eating." I used to think I was the one with poor manners. Took me a long time to realize that when you're with the wrong person, you're in the wrong no matter what you say. I didn't care what Chloe wanted to tell me. After lunch, I went to my room, gathered all the things we had bought for the wedding, found a large bag, and quietly packed them all away. My cousin was getting married at the end of the year, and my uncle's family wasn't doing too well financially. We had spent a lot of money on this stuff, and it would be a shame to just throw it out. I packed it all, planning to take it to her the next day. I stuffed my clothes into an old duffel bag. After Chloe left, I hauled the bag all the way to my parents' house. When my mom saw me, she immediately thought Chloe and I had broken up. To avoid any drama that might interfere with my university plans, I had to lie for now. I just told her we were buying a lot of new things and needed to clear out some old stuff first. That seemed to satisfy her. If my mom knew I was planning to call off the wedding, she'd probably chase me down the street with a kitchen knife. My parents and Chloe's parents worked at the same large company, so we had known each other since we were kids. Chloe was always the perfect child everyone's parents compared them to. Great grades, a great job, and easily the best-looking girl in our town. My mom had always been fond of her. Later, when I was still single, Chloe's parents suggested to mine that we would be a good match. At first, I assumed she was out of my league, being so beautiful and successful. But a few days later, my mom came home and excitedly told me that Chloe was apparently interested in me, too. That's when we started talking. Our relationship moved quickly over the next 6 months. And a month ago, our parents finalized the engagement. My mom told me I'd hit the jackpot, that a woman like Chloe was 1 in a million, and that I'd better hold on to her tight or she'd have my hide. To be honest, I was walking on air when we first got together. I never imagined someone like her would agree to be my wife. I sometimes noticed her mind seemed to be elsewhere when we were together, but I just chalked it up to work stress. I never imagined that even before we were married, she was already torn between me and Leo. She probably only chose me because I was the suitable option, the one both sets of parents approved of. At this point, the only thing left was the official license. She had let me move in with her earlier to help me study for my final exams. But now that I've taken back the application, it's all over between us. Leaving my parents' house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt relaxed. I bought a popsicle from a street vendor and slowly walked back. Just as I was nearing the apartment, my eyes were drawn to the figures of a man and a woman. "Chloe, please don't. I can't take this." Leo's voice was thick with emotion, on the verge of tears. Chloe, holding her bike with one hand, forcefully stuffed a wad of cash into his other hand. "Just take it. If I keep it, I'll just spend it on something frivolous. This way it can cover your living expenses for the next 6 months. That's far more meaningful." As they went back and forth, Leo seemed to spot me. He instinctively moved to stand in front of Chloe. "It's not what it looks like. Don't get the wrong idea. It's all my fault. I'm the one shamelessly bothering her. If you're going to be angry with me." The man's face was sallow, but he wore an expression of grim, misplaced bravery. He didn't notice that Chloe, whom he was so gallantly shielding, was staring at me, her face as white as a sheet. I walked past them without a flicker of expression, not even giving them a second glance. What a pain. Can't even walk down the street without running into this drama. A few Moments after I got back, Chloe pushed the door open and came in. When she saw me, her usually cool expression finally broke. "Ethan, let me explain." I looked at her calmly. "Fine, I'm listening." The truth was, I didn't care what she had to say, but seeing that I wasn't flying into a rage and seemed open to talking, she visibly relaxed. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this." I had to stop myself from scoffing out loud. Seemed to gather her thoughts before saying earnestly, "It's not what you think." I just looked at her, saying, "Nothing. I got hurt once, and I ran into him on my way to the clinic. He helped bandage my arm and went with me to the doctor." She glanced at me cautiously before continuing. "And the next few times I went back to have the dressing changed, I just happened to run into him again. I heard he was having a tough time financially, so I just wanted to help him out a bit. Too many coincidences mean it's not a coincidence." I knew Chloe was smart enough to understand that. She was just pretending not to. So spending that money on things for our wedding would be frivolous, but giving it to him is more meaningful. Even though I didn't care anymore, I couldn't resist the jab. Chloe's face fell and she looked flustered. "That's not what I meant." She knew exactly what she meant and it didn't matter to me either way. I thought for a moment, then said as sincerely as I could, "Have you ever considered that we could just call off the engagement?" I had to suggest it. If the idea came from her, at least my mom wouldn't raise hell about it. Besides, in our last life, she grew cold right after we filed the application, so she must have had regrets. Calling it off now would be better for both of us. But to my surprise, she frowned. "Is marriage a joke to you? You can't just decide not to go through with it. I'm a woman. What would people say about me? That's not the right way to think." Okay, I get it." I held up my hands in surrender. I had no desire to argue with her. So, I just went back to my room. I'd rather spend my time thinking about which stocks to invest in than listen to her lecture me. As for the capital, I'd have to use the money my parents gave me for the wedding. They were so happy about me marrying Chloe that they'd given me most of their life savings. I took the cash box out, removed all the money, and carefully wrapped it in a cloth. There was no way I was giving it back. Consider it my startup fund. If my mom gave me a hard time later, I'd just show her the profits. I figured she wouldn't stay angry for long if she saw how much I'd made. The next morning, the first thing I did was add another tally mark to the old poster. 8 more days and I could leave. "What are you writing?" Chloe's voice suddenly came from behind. I jumped, turning to see her standing right there. She looked at me, confused. "What are you writing on that poster?" She was so close that I could feel her breath on my neck. I flinched and quickly stepped away. The feeling was repulsive. I was going to brush it off, but she kept staring at the poster, so I had to invent a reason. Counting the days since we submitted the marriage application. For some reason, that answer seemed to please her. The look of confusion and unease on her face instantly vanished. She let out a sigh of relief and brought her hands out from behind her back. She was holding a small square velvet box. "Open it," she said, looking at me expectantly. It was strange. In my past life, we were married for 50 years. We raised a daughter and buried all 4 of our parents, but she never once bought me a gift. My eyes rested on the velvet box, and I felt a bitter sense of irony. "What's wrong?" "Go on, open it," Chloe urged again. I took a deep breath and pushed the box back toward her. "You should hold on to this. You can give it to me the day our marriage license is approved," I said calmly. Of course, that day would never come in this lifetime. A small smile played on my lips. Chloe looked down at the box in her hands and sighed. "Okay, then I'll keep it safe and give it to you on that day." I could tell she was disappointed. It's hurtful when you give someone a gift you're excited about and they won't even look at it. But so what? Compared to a lifetime of her deceit and the pain she caused me, this was nothing. After breakfast, Chloe got ready to leave. On her way out, she said she'd be back early so we could go see a movie. I didn't agree or disagree. I just watched her walk out the door. As soon as she was gone, I went to my room, grabbed the bags I'd packed the day before, and left a note on the table saying I was going to my uncle's for a few days. By the time the bus got me to the next town over, it was already noon. My aunt and uncle weren't expecting me and were surprised to see me show up with a huge bag. They quickly put down their lunch to greet me. My grandma was even more excited, hugging me tightly and calling me her darling. I was overjoyed to see my grandma, who had passed away so early in my previous life. She only had 2 children, and she always doted on me more than on my cousins. This time, in addition to the wedding supplies, I had also brought her a lot of health supplements. After we chatted for a bit, my uncle snuck out to catch a chicken for dinner. I knew there was no stopping him, so I let him be. My aunt saw my bags and joked that I looked like I was running from home. But when I opened the main bag, she saw what was inside and was left speechless. I smiled at their stunned faces. My mom wanted you to have these. If you want to thank someone, thank her. I figured I was already going to face my mom's wrath when I left for good. So, what was one more little lie I told myself already? Feeling a bit guilty. They relaxed when they heard the gifts were from my mom, though my aunt still seemed uneasy about how much stuff there was. My grandma, however, was more practical. She waved her hand dismissively. What's the fuss? Her cousin is getting married. Of course, we'd help out, put it all away. I had a wonderful time at my grandma's. At night, my cousin and I would stay up late while she told me all the local gossip. And during the day, my grandma would cook all my favorite foods. My aunt and uncle didn't have steady jobs. My aunt sold roasted sweet potatoes outside the local factory, and my uncle picked up odd jobs whenever he could. One day, while helping my aunt with her cart, I noticed the next stall over, which sold hair clips and accessories, was doing great business. Asked my aunt why she didn't try selling those instead. She just shook her head, saying she didn't have a supplier, that it would cost too much to buy inventory, and that she was too scared of having to deal with permits and being chased off by officials. I thought about it and filed the idea away. In my past life, my aunt and uncle struggled their whole lives, going gray far too early. But they were always incredibly kind to me. This time, if I could, I was determined to help them become financially stable. Knowing her reservations, I started casually mentioning how profitable other street vendors were. After a few days of my subtle suggestions, I noticed my aunt started watching the other stalls more closely. Eventually, she began asking me questions like, "Do you really think you can make more money selling things other than sweet potatoes?" I knew she was coming around. Now, I just needed the right opportunity. If I could find her a supplier, I was sure she'd give it a try. I ended up staying at my grandma's for a full week. I did it on purpose, knowing that once I left for university, it would be much harder to see them. During that week, I made a point of buying something from the hair accessory stall every day, and I finally got the owner to tell me where she got her inventory. I took my aunt and cousin to the wholesale market. We bought a small batch of items, and after 2 successful days of selling them, I finally felt I could leave. When I got back to the apartment, I dropped off the things from my grandma's and collapsed onto my bed, waking up after dark. The moment I stepped out of my room, I smelled food cooking. I was about to call out when I saw 2 figures in the kitchen, laughing and talking. I leaned against the doorframe watching them when Leo walked out, carrying a dish, and saw me standing there. He let out a yelp and dropped the plate, shattering it on the floor. Chloe rushed out in a panic, but her face went white the moment she saw me. The silence stretched for a moment before I broke. "Having a good time, you two? Should I make myself scarce?" Chloe finally snapped out of it and instinctively took a large step back. Leo looked at me with a hint of resentment. "What are you doing back?" I found that amusing. "Why do I need to check in with you before I come home?" At my words, he retreated 2 steps, his lips trembling. "That's not what I meant." Before I could respond, Chloe frowned. "What kind of thing is that to say? He's here studying all by himself with no one to look after him. You weren't home and I can't eat a whole meal by myself, so I invited him over. Don't make a scene." Seeing her instinctively shield Leo, I slapped her across the face without a moment's hesitation. Chloe was stunned, as if it had never occurred to her that I would ever hit her. Over her shoulder, I saw a smirk play on Leo's lips as he looked at me with defiance. I let out a cold laugh. With both of them watching, I picked up a pen and on the old poster, heavily filled in all the tally marks for the days I had missed. Only 2 marks left. The day after tomorrow, I could finally leave this place and never have to see these nauseating people again. After Leo left, Chloe stared at the tally marks on the poster. She seemed to find them incredibly odd, though she couldn't say why. Something about them just felt wrong to her. She looked over at me. "Ethan." I turned to her, my face a blank mask. "What is it?" Chloe hesitated. "There's really nothing going on between Leo and me." I had no interest in discussing it further, so I just picked up my chopsticks and started eating. Chloe fell silent as well. After dinner, she watched me sorting through the things I'd brought back from my grandma's. "Ethan," she said suddenly, "why is your room so empty? I thought you had bought a lot of things for the wedding." When I didn't answer, she seemed to grow anxious. "I was just thinking, since the application is in, we could start decorating the place. I saw you already bought those window decals. Why don't you give them to me? And I can put them up?" I scoffed. "Decorate with what? If you want them, you'll have to go to my cousin's place to get them." But not wanting to argue, I just said, "It's too early for that. Let's wait a few days." Seeing that I was willing to talk, she seemed to think the issue was resolved and let out a visible sigh of relief. The next morning, I was surprised to find she had made breakfast. After we ate, she didn't leave for work. I ignored her, picked up the pen, and solemnly made another tally mark on the poster. Perfect. The last day tomorrow at 6 a.m. I would be gone. Chloe watched me make the mark and smiled. "Don't worry, the marriage license should be approved any day now." I didn't look at her as I started clearing the table. "Why aren't you heading to work?" She kept smiling at me. "I was thinking since we're getting married soon, we should go buy some new clothes together." I paused what I was doing. She had a point. I was about to leave for university. I could use a couple of new outfits to start my new life. I went to my room to get some money. When she saw I wasn't refusing, she let out another small sigh of relief. In the end, we never bought those clothes. The moment we stepped outside, we saw Leo slumped against the wall of the building. It looked like he'd been there all night. Chloe gasped and rushed over to him. Leo opened his eyes and saw us clearly dressed to go out. He scrambled to his feet and looked at me. "Ethan, I'm so sorry about yesterday." He squinted at me for a second, then his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed toward Chloe. Her face palled as she caught him and started trying to shake him awake. I silently knelt and pressed my thumb hard into the pressure point under his nose. Leo flinched slightly, but forced himself to remain unconscious. I had to admit the man had self-control. Seeing that I was about to do it again, Chloe shifted to block my hand. "He's malnourished and anemic. I'm taking him to the hospital." Chloe helped Leo up and walked away without a backward glance. I closed the apartment door and followed them at a leisurely pace. At the clinic after the doctor had left, I watched Chloe sit anxiously by Leo's bedside before I walked over. When she saw me, she paused, then frowned. "What are you doing here?" I took a good look at the man in the bed. Leo wasn't handsome, and his poor nutrition gave him a gaunt, almost cruel look. I glanced back at Chloe. Maybe that was her type. My stare made her uncomfortable and she looked away. Looked calmly between the two of them. "The day you submitted our marriage application," I said. "He tried to drown himself." My statement must have been a bombshell. The man in the bed jolted and Chloe shot to her feet so fast she knocked her chair over. "What?" she stammered. I went on. "You gave him the money we were supposed to use for our wedding, saying that spending it on us was frivolous, but giving it to him was meaningful. And while I was away you brought him into our home." Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I held up a hand to stop her. Then I turned my gaze to Leo in the bed. "You know he's faking it. Are you really going to sit here with him all night?" Couldn't believe that Chloe, who grew up in a military family, couldn't see through such a pathetic act. "If you don't want to get married, you can call it off, but you will not humiliate me like this," I said, looking between them. The mention of calling off the wedding finally made her panic. "No, I'm not calling it off." I glanced at the man in the bed. His ability to keep up the charade was truly impressive. Then again, if he weren't so persistent he wouldn't have won Chloe over in our past life. Chloe continued, her voice rising as if trying to convince herself. "I just feel sorry for him. He has no family. He doesn't even have money for food. I just wanted to help him out. We're all supposed to help each other." I saw a single tear roll down from the corner of the man's eye. Pathetic. I shook my head. "Do whatever you want. I'm leaving." As I reached the door, I heard Chloe's voice behind me. "You go on home. I'll be back in a little while." Of course, I didn't take her words seriously. I went out and bought myself 2 new outfits, then waited for my parents to get off work and took them out for a nice dinner. I didn't return to the apartment until late that night. Everything that needed to be packed was packed. Everything that needed to be given away was gone. It was past 11 and Chloe still wasn't back. By then, I had finished writing a formal complaint to Leo's university. Consider it a thank you gift for all those days he so diligently sat by my deathbed in my past life. As for Chloe, out of respect for our parents, I would just let her be. The engagement was definitely off. I wrote a letter to my parents detailing everything that had happened with her and Leo, then went out to mail it that night. They would probably receive it in a day or 2. The next morning, after getting ready, I stood before the old poster one last time and carefully added the final tally mark. Then I picked up my bag and walked away without a backward glance on the train. It took half the day before I was able to upgrade to a seat. Watching the people bustling on the platform, I knew that every one of them was starting a new journey. And so was I. And just like that, I vanished from Chloe's life. Everything of mine in the apartment was gone. And I didn't leave so much as a single word. The only thing I left behind were the 10 tally marks on the poster. It was only then that she realized I hadn't been counting down to our wedding, but to my departure. Chloe later found out that I had withdrawn our marriage application the very same day she submitted it. I had even packed up all the wedding gifts from her family and left them neatly in the apartment. My parents came over with hers 3 days later, and it was only then that Chloe understood just how much Leo's presence had bothered me. But why couldn't I have given her one last chance? She knew he was faking it. Of course she did. She had decided that once he was out of the clinic, she would cut off all contact with him. She wouldn't let Leo make me unhappy. But I didn't even give her that chance. I just left. Chloe begged my parents not to call off the engagement, promising she would win me back. But my parents just shook their heads and looked at her with disappointment. She sat there stunned in the apartment we had shared, a place that was once filled with my presence. She opened the closet where we had stored the new bedding for our marriage, only to find it empty. That's when she finally collapsed, realizing I had been planning my escape for a long time. Later, Leo showed up at her door, telling her he'd been expelled from university because of a formal complaint filed against him. Chloe looked at him in silence. He begged her for help, asked if he could stay with her for a while. She turned him away. Coldly. How could she? I had left because of him. If she got involved with him again, she knew there would be absolutely no chance for us ever. Leo wouldn't give up. Knowing I was gone, he started pestering her. But Chloe was transferred to a new post shortly after. With me gone, there was no reason for her to stay. She remembered when she was a little girl, her parents taking her to visit my family. I was always following her around, listening to her tell stories, and bringing her handfuls of wild flowers I'd picked. Years later, when a matchmaker came to her parents, Chloe wasn't interested in being set up. But when she heard my name, something made her agree. We started dating, and soon I was her fiancé. But now all of that was gone. After her transfer south, Chloe wrote me letters, but I never replied. She even came to visit me once in secret. I was taller, more mature, and had a good group of friends. But she didn't dare let me see her. As my graduation approached, she secretly bought a house. She thought that if I would just forgive her, she would even be the one to propose to me. She waited with great anticipation. On my graduation day, she showed up with a bouquet. Heart clenched. Aren't you going to ask why? I placed the item in my hand into a bag, my voice as casual as if I were discussing the weather. There's no need. A wave of panic washed over her. It's not what you're thinking. I know, I said, standing up. I was half a head taller than her, and I looked down at her. I've already heard everything you have to say. In my past life. Chloe froze. The words past life hit her like a physical blow, making her head spin. I had already turned my back to her, my voice chillingly calm. Chloe, this time you don't have to explain, and I won't misunderstand because I no longer care. Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She realized that true loss wasn't a fight or a dramatic breakup. It was when the other person couldn't even be bothered to resent you anymore. Her eyes burned with tears. She reached for my sleeve, but grasped only air. Picked up my bag and walked right past her. A gust of wind blew in from the open door, chilling her to the bone. "Wait," she finally cried out, her voice trembling in a way she hadn't realized. What if I had chosen you from the very beginning?" I stopped walking. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited within her. But then I laughed. "Then I'd have even more regrets," I said. "Because that would mean I'd wasted 2 lifetimes on you." The door clicked shut behind me. The sound was soft, but it severed every last possibility between us. Chloe stood, frozen in place for a long, long time. Not until the sky outside darkened and the room grew so cold she began to shiver did she slowly sink to the floor and wrap her arms around herself. In that moment, she finally understood. It wasn't that I was cruel. It was that she didn't deserve the second chance I had been given. Later, Chloe took the transfer to the south. Leo followed her, thinking it was finally his turn, but Chloe never gave him another look. Poured all of her energy into her career, climbing the ladder one step at a time. But in the quiet of the night, she would remember a young man's silhouette. She'd remember the sight of my back as I did the dishes, the tally marks I'd silently made on the poster, and the day I walked away without looking back. Chloe achieved everything she wanted in life: position, honor, respect. But she never again found someone like me, someone who was willing to bet his entire life on her. Many years later, at a conference, Chloe heard someone mention a name. They were talking about an entrepreneur out in the Pacific Northwest. A self-made man who started in the stock market before moving into manufacturing, now worth a fortune. Someone in the group casually asked, "Is he married?" The speaker smiled. "Yes, and I hear he and his wife are very happy together." A sharp pain went through Chloe's chest. Fate, it turned out, was perfectly fair. The debt she owed me had finally been repaid in full with interest. Leo had always believed that with me out of the picture, he had already won. 3 days after I left, he stood in front of her apartment, looking at the closed door with the smug certainty of a victor. He had been by Chloe's side for so many years, waiting patiently. And now the obstacle was finally gone. That night, he showed up at her door with his meager luggage and knocked for a long time. When the door opened, Chloe stood there, her expression cold. "What are you doing here?" Leo was taken aback for a second, then put on what he must have thought was a gentle smile. "Chloe, I have nowhere else to go." He lowered his head, his voice. "There was some trouble at the university." Chloe's brow furrowed. "What kind of trouble?" Leo hesitated, his eyes welling up. "Someone filed a complaint against me. They said I had improper conduct, that I was a bad influence. The university told me to take a leave of absence to reflect." He said it casually, carefully avoiding the word expelled. Chloe said nothing. She wasn't a fool. But in that moment, she chose not to press the issue. "You can come in for..." Leo felt a wave of relief, so strong he almost smiled. He thought this was a sign that fate was finally on his side. He had no idea that the real consequences were just beginning. The first week of his stay went smoothly. Chloe still looked after him, cooking his meals and telling him to rest, but she started getting busier and busier. Working late, attending meetings, going on business trips. She came home later and later. Leo sensed something was wrong, but he was too afraid to ask. He had already lost everything. He couldn't lose Chloe, too. So, he tried even harder. To be useful, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry, playing the part of the poor, helpless victim to perfection. But the way Chloe looked at him began to change. The guilt and pity in her eyes were replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. One night, Leo got up for a glass of water and heard Chloe on the phone in her study. Her voice was low, but every word was crystal clear. "Yes, I confirmed it. He's the one who wrote the letter." Leo's heart seized in his chest. "No, I don't blame him. I deserved it. That's right. If I hadn't enabled it, things never would have gotten to this point." Leo stood in the darkness, a chill running through him. She knew. She knew everything. She knew who wrote the letter, and she knew it wasn't a baseless accusation but a final reckoning. The next morning, Leo was woken by a knock on the door. It was people from the university along with an internal affairs officer from Chloe's employer. They told him he needed to come with them to cooperate with an investigation. In that moment, he finally panicked. He thought as long as Chloe was there, he would be safe, but she just stood to the side, not saying a single word in his defense. As they led him away, he looked back at her, but she avoided his eyes. In that instant, he finally understood. He had never been her choice. He was just a burden she had picked up along the way. The investigation was swift. Leo was officially expelled, and a note was made in his permanent record about his long-term acceptance of improper financial support. The official report stripped away his facade of the poor, innocent victim, piece by piece. It turned out he wasn't destitute. He just spent his money irresponsibly. It turned out his constant illnesses were mostly exaggerated. It turned out he had long since mastered the art of using his pitiable state to manipulate people's guilt. When the news got out, it caused a stir. People who had once pitied him now avoided him like the plague. Those he had wronged in the past now watched his downfall with cold satisfaction. Leo became a social pariah. The last time he went to see Chloe, it was a rainy night. He stood outside her door, drenched to the bone, a perfect echo of his riverside drama. "Chloe, you can't do this to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I lost everything for you." After a long silence, Chloe's voice came from inside. "Leo, you never did any of this for me. You did it because you couldn't stand to lose." The door never opened. In that moment, Leo completely fell apart. He finally realized he hadn't lost to me. He had lost to time, to karma, and to his own manipulative heart. Years later, if anyone mentioned his name at all, it was only to say, "Oh, you mean that guy who used to live off other people's pity?" No one remembered his name, let alone his attempts to insert himself into someone else's life, and I became the name he would never dare to speak again. I didn't hear about what happened to Leo until my third winter in college. It had just snowed and the campus crates stacked beneath it. She suddenly remembered the day I left carrying my own bags. She had stood in the doorway back then, thinking that as long as she didn't break the engagement, I would eventually come back. She had forgotten that I wasn't just angry. I had woken up. But what truly broke her wasn't the name on the sign. It was a photograph she saw in the employee break room. It was a family portrait. I was in the center, my wife beside me, and I was holding our young daughter. We were all smiling. Not a forced posed happiness, but the quiet, comfortable contentment that comes with time. Chloe stared at the photo for a long time, suddenly realizing that she could have been the one standing in that spot. But she was the one who had walked away one step at a time. An employee walked up to her. "That's our boss. He doesn't like having his picture taken, but we made him do it for his daughter's birthday last year." Chloe nodded. "It's a lovely photo." Her voice was steady, but as she turned to leave, she felt her legs give way and had to brace herself against the wall. In that moment, she finally understood. She hadn't just lost me. She had actively let me go with every hesitation. Every time she chose someone else, every time she mistook her weakness for kindness. On the drive back to the city, as the sun set, she remembered something I had asked her long ago. "If I really leave one day, will you regret it?" What had she said? "Don't be silly." Looking back, she realized it wasn't reassurance. It was a refusal to face the truth. Back in her hotel room that night, she sat alone on the edge of the bed. She opened her phone, though she knew my name had been gone from her contacts for years. For the first time, she clearly understood that loss isn't about deleting a number. It's when you finally decide you want to hold on, only to realize the other person's life no longer has a place for you. She didn't cry that night. She just sat in the brightly lit room for hours because she knew if she turned off the light, the darkness would remind her of the man who once offered her his entire life, and she hadn't taken it. Now, the world had finally given her its answer. The first time Chloe truly wished she could have a do-over was the year she turned 56. She was in the hospital for a minor procedure, completely alone. Colleagues and subordinates had visited. The doctors and nurses were perfectly polite. But when night fell, the only sound in the room was the steady beeping of the machines. She suddenly remembered a time many years ago when I had been sick. She had paid a similarly brief visit before leaving. Back then she had assumed I would always be there waiting. Now she realized that one day you can wake up and find there is no one left in the world waiting for you. That night Chloe had a dream. She was young again. It was the day I had just left the registrar's office. In her dream, she burst into the office and saw our crumpled marriage application in the trash can. She bent down and picked it up. This time, she didn't hesitate. She ran out and grabbed my hand. "This time," she said, "I choose you." I turned to look at her, but my eyes were those of a stranger. "You're too late," I said. The dream shattered. Chloe woke with a start, her heart racing, only to find herself in the same hospital room. Before dawn. There was no rebirth, no second chance, only an aging body in a quiet room. She stared at the ceiling, and finally understood a hard truth. Not everyone gets to start over. After that, she started having the dream often. Dreamed of different versions of the past. A version where she never let Leo into her life. A version where she caught the train before I left. A version where she didn't use her pity for others as an excuse to avoid making a choice. But every dream ended at the exact same moment. The moment I turned away for the last time. One day she couldn't help but ask her doctor, "Is it possible for a person to get a second chance at life?" The doctor smiled kindly. "If it is, I imagine that person would have to be especially favored by fate." Chloe didn't respond. She knew fate had never particularly favored her. Her life had been one of smooth success, but she had never once been willing to risk it all for someone, and that is where fate is most fair. If you're too afraid to choose, you don't get a second chance. Later, while cleaning out old boxes, she found a letter she had written but never sent. It was addressed to me, written years ago. The paper was yellowed, but the words were still clear. "If you can ever find it in your heart to forgive me, I will give you the rest of my life." She read it, folded it neatly, and dropped it in the trash. In that moment, she finally admitted it to herself. It wasn't that she never had a chance. It was that, when her chances came, she never had the courage to take them. The year she was set to retire, Chloe stood at her window watching the sunset. She suddenly realized that some people are born to be spectators. You think you're the main character, but when the story ends, you find out you weren't even eligible for a sequel because you never once made a real choice. A breeze drifted through the window, making the curtain sway. She stood there for a long time, finally accepting that the only thing she could take to her grave was the question, what if? And I, in another world, had already lived the life I was meant to live. The moment I truly knew my new life was a success wasn't when I changed my fate, but many years later when I realized there was nothing left that needed fixing. My life wasn't a miracle. I didn't get rich overnight or rise to a position of immense power. I simply took each step exactly as it was meant to be taken. I knew which people were temporary, and I knew which decisions had to be made without hesitation. And so, for the first time, fate lost its power to test me. In this new life, Leo still ran into trouble, and he still wanted to be saved. But I was no longer there to extend a hand. It wasn't out of coldness. I had simply learned that not every cry for help deserves an answer. His life remained a struggle, but that was his own doing. The world didn't bend for his suffering. Chloe remained intelligent, successful, and morally upright in her own eyes. But in this life, she was never again granted the privilege of being waited for. My leaving wasn't a punishment. It was simply the world no longer setting aside a person just for her. Her life was a success, but true intimacy was forever out of her reach. Fate gave her a life that was whole but empty. And I married someone who had nothing to do with fate. She wasn't a symbol of anything. There was no sacrifice, no redemption. She was simply a person who, seeing me for who I was, still wanted to build a life with me. We didn't have a dramatic love story, but every morning we had each other. This time, I didn't leave my future in anyone else's hands. We had a daughter. The day she was born, as I held her, I finally understood the true meaning of being reborn. It wasn't about changing the past. It was about ending a cycle. I wouldn't pass my pain down to her. And I wouldn't disguise obsession as love. From my place in it, the world became simpler. If you could see it all from above, you'd notice that my rebirth didn't make the world more dramatic. It made it more peaceful. Because the thing that was truly corrected wasn't an event. It was the man who used to sacrifice himself just to feel like he existed. In this new timeline, there was no applause for me and no tears for Chloe. Everyone simply got the ending they deserved. No favoritism, no pity. Many years later, I stood at my window, watching the dusk settle. It occurred to me that if I hadn't been given a second chance, all of this might have happened anyway. But I wouldn't be here living it with clear eyes. Fate didn't choose me. I finally chose myself. And so the loop closed. The world settled. The story was over. Some people are granted a second life, not because they are more deserving of love, but because they have finally learned to stop trying to fill the empty spaces in other people's lives. The year I turned 57, I realized it had been a long time since I thought the words, "if only." It wasn't a conscious effort. The thought had simply lost its power to enter my mind, like a road that had been permanently closed. That was the year my daughter left for college. Before she left, she asked me, "Dad, is there anything you really regret from when you were younger?" I thought about it for so long that she started to look uncomfortable, thinking she'd overstepped. Finally, I smiled. "Yes, but in the end, I chose not to." My daughter nodded, not quite understanding, but she never forgot what I said. Years later, she would realize. It wasn't an answer about regret, but the passing down of a philosophy. On the other side of the country, Chloe retired. Her retirement party was proper and reserved. There were speeches from her superiors and flowers from her colleagues. Every formality was observed, but afterward she walked home alone slowly. There was no one for her to wait for and no one hurrying to catch up. Back in her empty house, for the first time, she didn't turn on the television. She just sat on the sofa and listened to the wind. In that moment she understood. Fate had never been cruel to her. It had simply offered her choices, and every time she had taken the safest, most solitary path. Thought of me then, not as the one that got away, but as the man who had laid his entire future at her feet, and whom she had refused to accept. The realization brought no pain, only the clarity of a long-avoided truth. Leo moved from city to city over the years. He had a few relationships, but they all ended the same way, with him complaining that the other person wasn't good enough. He never understood that the problem wasn't other people. It was that he was always looking for someone else to carry his burdens. And the last person willing to do that for him was long gone from his life. The world didn't stop for anyone's regret. Business deals were made, children grew up, and new stories began every day, and I became someone whose story no longer needed to be told. The year I turned 70, my wife and I spent some time living by the ocean. One afternoon, as we sat watching the tide, she asked me, "If you could live your life all over again, would you do it better?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, because this time there's nothing left to change." My wife smiled and didn't ask again. She knew it wasn't confident speaking, but a man with whom fate had finally made its peace. Many years later, I passed away peacefully. I left no final words. My epitaph was a single sentence. I lived and I was cleared. In another city one evening, Chloe saw a small obituary in the paper. She stared at the name for a long time, but she didn't cry. She just whispered to herself, "So that's how it really ends." In this world, there are no winners and no one is cursed. There are only three endings: those who learn to choose, those who spend their lives avoiding choices, and those who are trapped by the consequences. And fate only grants a second chance to the first.